Hi everyone, I am Tock Custom, and on this video we're going to talk about all kinds of different seams and stitches to help you with your project. So in our last video we set up and threaded the Brother SE700. Big thanks to Brother for sending me this and sponsoring this video. And now we're going to kind of dig into some of the features and show you what we can do with this. Alright, so we're just going to go to our main stitch selection screen here, and there's all kinds of different stitches, and we're only going to talk about a few. But I did want to point out this button here will let us modify each stitch, so we can change the width, the length of each stitch, and the center point of our needle. And this will set us back to default. So on some of our examples, I'll show you how we can modify our stitch. Now our first example is just going to be our number 1 straight stitch. For our first example, we're going to sew 2 pieces of denim together. Now this is a woven fabric, which means it's not stretchy, and we're going to line this up on the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on our plate right here. Now I'm going to start with my needle about 1/2 inch onto the fabric, and with my needle down, I'm going to start by doing a couple stitches forward, and then we're going to hold the back stitch button and do a bunch of back stitches up to the edge of fabric, and then I'm going to let go and let it run forward. Now I'm going to take out my pin and we're just going to sew all the way across. And this is going to be our first basic straight stitch. Now as I get up to the other end, I'm going to do another back stitch here. Then I'm going to let go and let it run right off the end of the fabric. Now I'm just going to cut my thread, and we now have our first basic seam, which is a straight stitch. And the outside should look something like that. Something that is underappreciated in sewing is pressing your seam. So that looks great, but we want this to look like a robot made it. So we are going to flip this over, and with pretty much all of our seams, we're going to press it to one side. Doesn't matter which side. But this is the difference between something that looks handmade and something that looks store-bought. And it might not seem like that made a huge difference, but over the course of a whole project, it's going to make it look so much more professional. All right, so we have our seam pressed and it's falling to the right behind the fabric. So I'm gonna line up this outside seam with the left edge of my presser foot right here. Now we're about 1 inch onto the fabric, and I'm gonna put my needle down right there. So to do our top stitch, we are gonna do a couple stitches forward and then a couple backward to do our back stitch. And now our top stitch is just gonna go all the way along this edge, keeping that left side of the edge flush with the left side of the presser foot. Then when we get to the end, do our back stitch, and then we are done. All right, so there we have our first top stitch, which looks great, and it also makes our seam stronger since we've got 2 rows of stitches there. Next, we're going to do a curved straight stitch. So on this machine, stitch number 1 has the needle position on the left, and I get much better control when the needle is in the middle on my curves. So we're going to go to stitch 3 here. Now keep in mind, if you move your needle position, it's going to change your seam allowance, so make sure you adjust according to how much you moved it. But anyway, I'm going to start on the front of my curved edge here, and I'm just going to kind of curl the fabric with my fingers while it's being fed through the machine. And this example would be something like the hood of a hoodie. And I'm going to finish my stitch right here. Now when you curve on seams, it'll force the fabric to pucker, or in this case, it should make a little miniature hood as if we're making a hoodie. So this is more of a preference for sewing on curves with the needle in the middle than an actual stitch. Okay, next we're going to do an edge stitch. So I've got another basic seam that I'm just pressing right here like we've been doing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold this so that the center of our seam right here is going to be folded right on this edge right here. And we're going to lay this flat so that our seam is right on that edge, and then we're going to press it like that. All right, so that seam is right in the middle between these 2 panels of fabric. So we're going to line up our pressed edge here with the right side of our presser foot and put our foot down about 1/2 inch onto the fabric. Now I'm going to change my needle position so that it is all the way to the right. And now I'm just going to start with my back stitch, and we're just going to sew all the way across. All right, so there is our edge top stitch, or as I just call it, the edge stitch. Next, we're going to do our triple top stitch, but first I'm going to modify this so the stitch length is 5 millimeters. So a triple top stitch goes 2 stitches forward, 1 stitch back. So every stitch has 3 runs of thread. And there are 2 reasons I like this stitch. 1, it looks awesome. And 2, it allows your fabric to stretch if you're using a stretch fabric. All right, so I'm going to finish my stitch here, and let's see how this looks. So here is our triple top stitch, which I love this very pronounced upholstered look to it. And next to our edge stitch, you can see the difference between the 2 right here. Now, we're making all these seams look great on the outside, but let's talk about making them look good on the inside. So over time, your inside raw seams are going to start to fray and fall apart, and if you're trying to sell stuff or look professional, this is going to look really bad. So let's talk about some options for how we can finish these seams on the inside. Now, the most simple and basic option is doing a zigzag stitch over that raw edge. So we're going to select the number 8 stitch, and I'm going to modify it to be as wide as it can go and a little bit shorter of a stitch. And something cool about this machine is it shows you what the stitch will look like. We're going to line this up so that the first stitch is going to go into the fabric, and on a zigzag, it's going to stitch once on the left and then once on the right. And we want the stitch on the right to just barely go off the edge, like you can see right there. Now, I'm just going to put my foot down, and I'm going to do a back stitch even though I don't think I need to. Now I'm just going to let this run so that the edge of this seam is right between where the needle falls. And we're going to go all the way across. Now this is what you'd call a zigzag overlock. So it doesn't look amazing, but it's certainly going to look a lot better than frayed fabric right here. So that's one option for finishing your seam on the inside. The best method of finishing your seams is with a machine like this. This is a serger or an overlock machine, and I'm just going to run this real quick and show you what it can do. And this is the Brother Airflow 3000. This is the serger that threads itself with the power of air, and I love this machine. All right, so here is our serge seam. So the blue stitching was our basic straight stitch from earlier, and then we use the serger to overlock that edge. So it uses 4 threads to stitch it down and wrap up the edge so that it can't fray while it's cutting the fabric. Now this is how you get really professional results, especially if you want to start selling stuff. But if you don't want to run out and spend a bunch of money on a new machine, you can do the zigzag method over your edge. Now let's talk about stretch fabrics for a moment. So I've got some white rib knit fabric here, and just for fun, let's say we want to sew 2 pieces of a stretch fabric together. Now I'm just going to do this with a straight stitch like we've been using on all of our woven fabrics. So let's say we make a t-shirt and we just do a straight stitch like that. You're going to go and you're going to be like, wow, that's puckering a lot, weird. And then you're going to go to put on your shirt and stretch it, and all the threads are going to pop like that, and your shirt's going to fall apart. So there are a whole bunch of stitches designed for stretchy fabrics, and we're going to talk about a couple. Now my favorite stretch stitch is the number 6, or as I call it, the lightning bolt stitch. I'm not even going to modify any of the settings, but this has a great, really narrow profile and still allows the thread to stretch. So let's see how this looks. I should mention this is a 2-way stretch knit fabric, so it stretches left and right, but not up and down. There are 4-way stretches, but I'm going to be sewing this the up and down way. With most stretch stitches, you can't do a back stitch, so we're just going to sew this just like this all the way across. I'm going to finish that. And now, when I go to stretch this, you can see that the stitches are bending with the fabric and they're not going to break, which is exactly what we want. On the outside it would look nice and straight, and normally I'd use white stitching so you can't see that, but this looks nice and strong. Now I pretty much never top stitch my knit fabric seams because it puckers too badly, but I will very often finish or serge these seams. Something else that's great about a serger is all the stitches are stretchy, so you don't have to worry about any of these popping on stretchy fabrics. All right, now we're going to go back to our zigzag stitch, and we're going to use it the way that you're supposed to. Now we're just going to line this up on our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're going to do this the same way that we did the lightning bolt stitch. This is just more of the classic original method of doing a stretch stitch. So this is probably going to be a little bit easier to see, but as we pull the fabric, the stitches don't have any pressure because they've got the zigzag going on. And again, if we open this up, you should have a nice sturdy seam right there too. Okay, now we're going to go back to our lightning bolt stitch because I want to show you how to do a basic hem on a stretch fabric. So let's say we just made a t-shirt and this is the bottom edge of our shirt and we want to hem the lower edge. With a stretch fabric like this, I will only fold it over once for a hem. And I'm going to put our folded edge in here so the needle is pretty close to the top of where that fold is. It can be kind of hard to press knit fabrics into shape, so I usually just do this by hand. But I've got my lightning bolt stitch set, and I'm going to just start sewing. In fact, I'm going to make the stitch length a little bit more so that it pulls the fabric in a little bit faster. Now, I'm just going to kind of hold this hem where I want it to stay. And it's okay to pull it in the back a little bit and in the front to really flatten this out, but don't pull it too much because then your fabric can pucker. This is one of those things that just takes a little bit of practice. Now as we're getting to the seam we did earlier, I'm just going to fold it towards me and kind of fold it in half like that, and then we're just going to sew right over that top edge. And now I'm really going to stretch the fabric so that it stays flat. Then once we make it over that seam, I'm just going to keep rolling this over. And the idea is just to try to keep that rolled hem the same distance all the way across. All right, so there is the hem on our stretch fabric, and as you can see, that's not gonna pop because we've got a nice stretch stitch, and this is gonna look good on the outside and the inside because knit fabrics really don't fray very much at all. Now we're going to go back to our number 3 straight stitch, and we're going to do a rolled hem on this piece of woven fabric. And we want to roll it because we want to lock in that edge so it doesn't fray everywhere. So the way I do this is I take my edge and I fold it over about 1/2 inch once, and then I'll fold it over a second time, like that. And it makes it a lot easier if you press this into place because it'll actually stay. But just for a quick little demo, I'm just going to kind of squish it in the presser foot like that. And I'm going to run a straight stitch just along the top edge of this roll here. And this would just be a basic rolled hem on a piece of woven fabric. Now this was our triple top stitch from the inside. We're just going to be careful to keep rolling it and then holding it down as we go. So as I get closer to the needle, I'm just tucking under that raw edge and then folding it like that and keeping the same distance all the way down. All right, so on the inside, we've got a nice clean hem, so you don't see any frayed there, although I wish I had serged this seam. But on the outside, we've got our triple top stitch with our hem, and this is gonna look even better once we press this. Now we're gonna do a French seam. So we're gonna put our fabrics wrong sides together, which is very not typical for me. And this is a great stitch if you want to hide all your raw edges without overlocking anything. Now this is really important math-wise, because if you want to do a proper 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, the first part you have to do at 1/4 inch. So we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam, and again, these are wrong sides together. All right, now we're going to grab our iron. Okay, so we're going to open our seam, and again, this is the outside or the right side of our project. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this right sides together. We're going to kind of wiggle the seam all the way towards the edge, kind of like we did with the edge stitch that we did. And once I've got that seam in the middle, we're going to lay it flat and then press it. Now I can see my edge is right on that seam in the middle there. Okay, so we're going to line this edge up with the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And if we add 1/4 inch plus 3/8 of an inch, we're going to get 5/8 of an inch seam allowance total. Now I'm just going to do a straight stitch all the way across at 3/8 of an inch. And what it's doing is it's going to lock those raw edges between these two stitches so that you get nice fabric on the inside and the outside. All right, so let's see how that looks. On the outside, we've got just a very normal looking seam. And then on the inside, we have our seam with no raw edges and no overlock stitching. So you wouldn't really ever do this with denim, but you would do this with very lightweight fabrics or bridal fabrics. Now, those are most of the stitches I do for construction, and now we're going to talk about some decorative ones. So I'm going to do our zigzag stitch, and we're going to modify this to be a satin stitch. So we're going to set the width to about 5 millimeters, and then the length will be about 0.2 millimeters. And you can see it's going to create this really solid bar, or a satin stitch. So I'm going to use the piece that we did our edge stitch on, and I'm just going to put this on my edge here, do a little back stitch, and this is going to go really slow because we set the length at 0.2 millimeters. So sometimes you got to kind of push it to get it started. And now I'm just going to let this run all the way across, and it'll use a lot of thread because it's going really slow and really wide. All right, so as you can see, we've got a very solid line of satin stitching. This is great for decoration and making straps strong, and you can even sew on patches and do applique with this. Now, since we're talking about decorative stitching, if I hit this button on the bottom left and hit OK, this will bring us back to all of our categories of stitches. So I'm going to do this decorative stitch category, and there are tons of these, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but this one's really cool, so I wanted to show you one. All right, so I just picked this kind of swirly design, and we're going to see how this looks. Right, and here is one example out of dozens of all kinds of decorative stitching we could do for clothes or costumes or bags or anything. Those are the basic stitches I could think of for right now. We will get to zippers and buttons and more in the future. Another big thanks to Brother for sponsoring this video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next tutorial.